Bitcoin's collapsed $12,000 since the all-time high 5 days ago. MicroStrategy has continued to collapse, this time breaking a very key level at $360. Meanwhile, Michael Saylor changes up the game plan on how he is going to buy back Bitcoin. Plus, there are new fears of the AI boom being over. So what does this all mean to Bitcoin, cryptos, the traditional markets? We'll plan to unpack that in today's video. So hit the like, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. I'll be covering everything across the board today: Bitcoin, stocks, the stock markets, commodities, cryptocurrencies, some of the majors there, and of course the real estate cycle as we begin a day on new fear for the cryptocurrency market. Along with that, I'll also look at the long-term cycle here for Bitcoin, plus of course the short-term analysis for BTC. So I'll start with the short term. Obviously down $11,800, nearly 10% from the high. We need to understand the price levels, the support and resistance. Like we'd covered in yesterday's video, one day later, we're a little closer to that 50% level. So it was always going to be a date with destiny here for Bitcoin after it put in this double top. And the next price target, should we break down from the 50% level, is looking at this double top. So often when markets put in double tops, they run close to, if not exceed, the 150% level. This is a reference range of this particular price range, high to low, projected off the double top. So the second top for the double top. So we've broken through the 50%. Bear with it. You can see the lines in the background here. There's $119,000 as a round number. Happened really quickly and stayed underneath. Therefore, the chances increase that we were going to hit 100%. And should we break through this next support level, 111 through to where we are now, that 112, then I'm targeting somewhere around 107. As we've discussed, there is some support coming in here. And if there is moves to the downside, we want to see this bounce back above relatively quickly to maintain the bullish structure. So that's a look at the short term, as simple as it can be. We've got the bears in control, you've got the support and resistance levels, and have explained the strength and the weakness should we see price break and hold below the level, or break and fake out and then close back above. One is weak, the other is relatively strong, chasing out some of the weaker hands there. But why are we seeing weaker hands? Now, our daily videos cover many detailed charts, data, indicators, and our forte, the cycle analysis, to help guide us through the investment cycle. So if you're a brand new subscriber to the channel, then I highly encourage you to get our weekly reports on Bitcoin, altcoins, and the economy, including the real estate cycle. They're easy to read in under 5 minutes each, making them extremely digestible for all investor levels. There are 3 reports coming your way starting your week from Tuesday. It'll get you up to speed on how we forecast the markets and how we've been able to profit during uncertain times leading into and out of the cycle peak. It's completely free, so subscribe today using the link in the top of the video description and you'll receive your first report shortly. But why are we seeing weaker hands? Well, if we turn to the news headlines, which we just want to see what the market is looking at, not necessarily trade off it. Crypto stocks tumble as investors they go to risk off mode. We can see there was a lot of stocks that collapsed over the last 24 hours. Robinhood and Galaxy Digital, 10% down, 7% for Strategy, SharpLink, Bitmine, Circle, Coinbase, you name it, these stocks were down. There is some fears that the AI, concerns over the future of AI has got a little bit out of hand. And of course, we've seen that with the NASDAQ as well. Bitcoin is more correlated with the NASDAQ than it is with the S&P 500, but they're basically all very, very similar at this stage of the cycle. And if you guys have been watching the channel, you can see the 3-bar rule has come up, this time on the daily chart. So it's not as severe as if we saw it on the weekly chart. This is from a significant turning point. So I'm on the NASDAQ here, and we're looking at the NASDAQ because, as I said, or the Bitcoin is correlated to the NASDAQ. So we want to see what's going on here for the NASDAQ. This would suggest that we've got the seasonal consolidation or seasonal correction underway, as I'll look at in a moment with the cycles as well. So this has been stemming for the last week. And in the after hours market for Wednesday, the upcoming day here for the NASDAQ, we now have 5 days down. So quite a significant drop here. Maybe we see it reverse. Obviously, that's going to come out in the next 24 hours. But the main thing is we've got the signal at the high, which suggests there's going to be a slowdown here. It's back underneath the previous old all-time high, which makes things look choppy for August. On the back of that, Michael Saylor has been buying a little bit of Bitcoin here, but the big one is what he has done with how they distribute the stock, whether they sell the stock to buy some more Bitcoin, or whether they will consider issuing credit to repurchase their stock. If they're going to consider repurchasing their stock to pump up the price of MicroStrategy, where are they going to get this money from? That's the next question. If people stop believing that MicroStrategy is going to be the next big thing, well, then they're not going to get any money. And I think the market has spoken. The market is speaking, and in the short to medium term has spoken. Now, followers of the channel know we've been covering this for months as a somewhat leading indicator for the cycle. Doesn't mean that Bitcoin is over. There are lots of companies that are buying Bitcoin. There's still signs to suggest it's got further upside in the cycle, but some of the dominoes are falling, and they are falling fast. In the case of MicroStrategy, there is obviously a cult following. There are still some higher lows here, but the lows are getting lower, and this is beginning to break down. For the bulls, they need a quick reversal here, back above 360. Back above 360, it was a fake out, all good. But if you see a rally into $360, that's this white line here, then there's probably going to be further downside, which is not great for MicroStrategy, of course, and that could start to unwind all of this minor sort of leverage that they've begun to build in the company. That might be the second signal. To me, this is one of the first ones, and then we go all the way back to the November 2024 top, and that was the current all-time high for MicroStrategy. Meanwhile, you can see all of these arrows that I've got here. This is the price points at which MicroStrategy was at while Bitcoin was putting in new all-time highs. So Bitcoin can still put in new all-time highs while MicroStrategy comes down. And you can see even the most recent one, MicroStrategy was way down here, breaking underneath 50%, 390 bucks, well underneath the $450 resistance, while Bitcoin put in its $124,000 all-time high. But to me, for my analysis, maybe you share the same views. I think this one is an important one to watch for the remaining stages of this cycle to see how well MicroStrategy can hold up here, or if it does start to break down. These levels are going to be absolutely critical, $230 to $280 for it to maintain so it can keep buying back Bitcoin. Otherwise, it's going to be in a very difficult position to buy back any Bitcoin because it's going to be underneath or very close to that $210, which is below their 2.5 times NAV, which means that they essentially can't buy Bitcoin and they have to issue credit to repurchase MicroStrategy. Is that credit going to come from leverage? Is it going to come from investors? We'll find out down the track. If it comes from leverage, that's going to be a bad thing for MicroStrategy because they're going to have to pay back that leverage at some point. How are they going to pay that back? Now, the default, give the company up. The company has Bitcoin, then they're going to have to sell that Bitcoin to pay back any of these debts. That's a long way off, but it's something to keep in mind because the market is speaking right now. Literally in the last 24 hours, breaking 360 on increasing volume here as it collapsed underneath the 50%, increasing volume as it rejected at $450, increasing volume on the downside as it got rejected also here when Bitcoin put in a new all-time high in May, briefly above and then rejected. So the selling is coming in a little bit hard and fast here for MicroStrategy, but it's not the end of the world yet for Bitcoin. We have a resetting here on the fear and greed index down to 44, which is a good sign. Here is the fear and greed. The resetting typically happens when Bitcoin's got a little bit overheated, and we just need to get back into a position that the market isn't so hyped up. And that can look like leveraged positions getting wiped out to the tune of this case, again, another day in a row of $500 million of leverage getting wiped out of the market. The exchange volume has ticked down slightly, still sitting around 70 odd billion dollars, slightly lower high, higher lows. This isn't great for altcoins, but there is still some life there in the market. There's still interest going on. And the search volumes here have died off in the last week or two, looking at the 90-day chart. So Bitcoin's search volume is down, that's in the red. The blue line is crypto and the yellow line is Ethereum. So everything has died off in the last week or so since there was the absolute mayhem of Ethereum flipping Bitcoin, Ethereum going to 15K, 20K, 60K, as we talked about in the videos last week, just how the hype happens to come through at those tops. Same sort of thing for altcoins here. It also peaked out a week ago and has since absolutely collapsed. There's been a lot of talk about how altcoins boomed and the search volume was way above where it was in 2021, yet now it's begun to collapse from that high. So ideally this collapses into a higher low and then you start to see a bit more interest. The time frames that we were watching now for Bitcoin was that 7 to 14 days from the high. I'll take this off so it's a little bit clearer because we're watching these time frames to the downside. So we've got price targets, we've got reasons why, if you want to look at the narratives. Now next is, when is all of this going to transpire? We're only 5 days down from the top so far. This correction took 31 days. This correction took 20 days. And ideally, we don't go much further than those two corrections that I've just looked at. And we don't get into something like this, 70 odd days, because that would start to look like the end of the cycle because you'd now have the bears taking control for a longer period of time. We want it to stay relatively short term like what we're seeing to then pump into this final stage of the cycle. So keep up to date with the time frames. They're going to be absolutely critical now moving into the end of the cycle. And speaking of cycles, the predictive cycles are looking at the last 5 and 10 years are pretty much on track. The red line is the composite of 2020 being the COVID year, so we had a significant collapse, and 2015, which was the low year before the market ran up. What we're using this for is a pattern in the market, and August, September, Q3 show historically there is some turbulence through this period. So we drop into a low, and then as we stretch it out and watch the remainder of the remaining part of the year, October leads into that November, into some sort of high price there. So we end up with some sort of peak, possibly around October, November, maybe it stretches into December, like you can see here with the chart. So we'll keep watching the cycles because the dates are lining up relatively well with some of the fundamentals that have continued to pour out of the US. US Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, delayed decisions on multiple high-profile crypto exchange-traded funds, so basically ETFs, pushing those reviews out till October. So we've looked at October many times for the end of the cycle. Not to say that it is the end of the cycle, but there is good reason to keep that as a very strong time target for a potential high. That comes in roughly around the 150 odd days, 150 odd weeks from the low. So we go 152, 153, 154. There's October. Why are we using 152? Well, that's essentially 3 years, and that's what Bitcoin did last cycle, 152 weeks from the exact price low to the price high. It did it the year before, 152 from the exact cycle low to the cycle top, and the first cycle did 163. So if we average them out somewhere around that 154, 155, if we use the bottom end, 152, we use the top end around 163. So I'm watching the first target first, and then should we see the market continue to be strong, then we push it out to the next time targets. That's how price targets work. That's how time targets work. And thus far, 152, somewhere around that October period. So even when, like last cycle, even when people thought that it couldn't go again, it was over in April. It did run back to a new all-time high in October. So keep that date in mind. And then a slightly higher high in November, a few weeks later. So October, mid-October, 18th of October was the week beginning then. You can check it out here. That's going to be very, very similar to a 4-year repeat if we get that far. So things are looking all right there, especially as some of these high profile exchange traded funds. This is for Bitwise, it's for Solana, decisions on Litecoin ETF applications for Grayscale, Canary Capital, CoinShares, and also Trump's Truth social media platform. So he's got his ETFs there as well. Treasury companies also holding a lot of Bitcoin. Should MicroStrategy or strategy start to slow down based on what I've talked about already in this video, that might scare a lot of these guys as well. Who knows? MicroStrategy has talked about never selling their Bitcoin. I don't know if that's possible, that they can never sell, but these other companies don't talk about holding their Bitcoin forever. A lot of them have done it for the hype and obviously the stock market price increase. Speaking of which, stock markets also look like they're into their seasonal pattern here with the corrections, as I showed earlier with the NASDAQ having multiple days down here. Even if this goes a little higher, we've seen it many, many times before where it does start to push a little higher, like on the S&P 500, and then basically roll over again and push a little higher and roll over again. There's been multiple times that we've seen this signal. That was an all-time high. 1, 2, 3. It did run higher. 1, 2, 3. It rolled over again. And then as you look at the top coming in, it took months. So here is the first one in October. And then the market basically didn't go anywhere. Look at that in terms of a percentage from when the signal was there, from that top to the final top, 4% over the course of 4 months. So yes, it did go higher, but it's really not any sort of gains compared to what the market has done in the last years. So if we're in the midst of that at the moment, then it's going to be something to watch and be concerned with for this consolidation. Something that we also pointed out with the 5-year cycle, looking back to the COVID drop as well. So this is it here. This is the 20-year cycle leading into that final top of 2007. This is the 5-year cycle. Many of them suggest that there is going to be some turbulence, some consolidation after these significant moves. That's the main thing to take away with these cycles, just so that we're prepared for the moves from that, the moves that come next. And you can see that there is a bit of a growth here into new fresh prices come Q4. Another reason why this may not be the end of the game, and if you have made it this far, let me know. Hit the like, subscribe to the channel. I've got gold here. If you did make it this far, give me a gold emoji down below so I know. This one is quite interesting because the stock markets are going down, Bitcoin's going down, but also metals are going down. So it doesn't necessarily seem like there is a flight to safety or a flight to risk off assets, as in the case of gold here. It's also been coming down while the markets have been coming down. So it seems like just a bit of a profit-taking measure. Market participants looking like they're waiting on this seasonality to be over, if it is such a thing, as obviously the market is talking about here. Plus, we're seeing the US dollar climb a little here as well. So it started to climb higher. All things that still seem to make sense as part of the 18-year cycle. Here is my chart. And this is a new one, by the way. We've moved this a little higher into the peak. And they seem to make sense with the Bitcoin cycle. You're seeing some consolidation, some upside on the US dollar. When that occurs, generally it hits commodity prices. And I've seen that here with gold down. And as I've relayed that to the correction on the stock market, it doesn't seem like it's coming into the risk off commodities. So US dollar, how long is this going to go on for? How long do we have to put up with this pain? In the past, it's in this cycle, going back over 10 years now to the 2015 top, the US dollar collapsed, put in a new 3.5 year low, and it consolidated for a few months here. There's January to April. Then it did it again. There's 144 weeks. It's low to low, a new 3-year low. It consolidated from that point in late December to the breakout point. That was the high there of November. But you can see the breakout just here. That was about March. So roughly 3 months in this little period, a breakout, pull back into the zone, and then it took off. This time, however, as I've been pointing out, the downtrend has now exceeded each of these downtrends. So we're in a macro change of trend. And even if we get this rally up here, I think we've got further downside to go here for the US dollar. But for the time being, the US dollar is holding its ground here at a 98. But for the time being, the US dollar is holding its ground, potentially putting pressure on commodities. And we're also seeing timeframes run out, price resistance levels being hit for Bitcoin. And so that added pressure of the US dollar strength is probably not helping Bitcoin at this stage. Now sitting around 113,000. So the real estate cycle, still on track, getting very close to this peak. Here's an update. Michael's posted it on his X. I've left a link to Michael's channel in the YouTube video description. Go and check this out. Check out his thoughts as well after this video. But we are getting close to this point because we've now met several of our checklist items, if you will, to meet this peak. Things like copper hitting new all-time highs, being part of the economy, the home builders ETF hitting new all-time highs, potentially coming back into a lower high. These are signs that the cycle is beginning to peak and round out this top before we get the downtrend in the coming years. It's happening. It's happening before our eyes. And I think we've got just a bit more time to go, as we've seen with some of the cycles that I covered in today's video. So to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, again, or mostly crypto, just want to have a look at these forward returns for BTC. You've got greens in a row, August, potentially in a end of month red, 10 more days to go. That would then line us up with many of the other months that have occurred. Green July, red August, and then a strong move to the end of the year. Ideally, that is what happens for this cycle, of course, so we get further upside. The US dollar dominance has also shown signs that it is forming a base. As I pointed out here, on 14th of August, when this broke down and then snapped back above, that was a sign that it was likely going to see further upside for the USDT dominance, which of course will put pressure on cryptos and Bitcoin. And that's so far exactly what has happened. The thing the bulls don't want to see would be a breakout above 4.8% and for the USDT dominance to consolidate above that level. Spikes above, no big deal. We've seen it before. There's a spike, and then this bar closed back underneath that swing top, indicating that there was going to be some possible weakness coming up. Yes, you've got to wait around, and then it broke down. That's ideally what we want to see. Just any sort of tests here, consolidation, and then the breakdown begins again. Now, just as a reminder, I've pointed out that I think there is the potential that we see a top in Bitcoin and crypto form somewhere around 3.7 to 4.2% for the dominance. So you'd see this thing come up, back down into this zone, and then you start to see a top form for Bitcoin and cryptos. The best case scenario for blow-off moves is a breakdown of 3.7. So it hasn't done enough yet to get there. Ideally, it does. Everything's a big, ridiculous party. All of the bulls, the cautious bulls, were not bullish enough, and the story goes on, so everyone wins. But if it doesn't, and we run to those timeframes, and you see the USDT dominance saying around 3.7 to 4.2, that's probably going to be a pretty important level to watch. And at that stage, if your altcoins really haven't started moving on, like the dominance, like the others dominance here hasn't had a move on yet, then time is essentially running out. And for now, cryptocurrencies outside of the top 10 really haven't got a move on and have continued to correct. This chart that's essentially what this chart is saying. It needs to get above 10% relatively quickly. And of course it can do it, but it's just taking its sweet ass time. ETH Bitcoin also taking its sweet ass time here. It was an okay segue. It got rejected at the level we're watching here. That's that 10-year resistance line. And day after day, it's just correcting any price points back down to 2.8. Still okay for ETH in the long term. Pretty big volume there at the top as expected. But the end price target for this cycle, I'm looking somewhere around that these levels. You can see these lows. There's 4.8, but that's a nice round number. The 50% level is usually where the date with destiny ends up for a lot of these charts, and that's at around 5.3% for ETH. So if we see how to use this, if we start to see ETH USD forming some sort of top, the stablecoins forming some sort of low, and ETH BTC hitting up towards some resistance levels, you can see here at 4.8-ish to 5.3, probably a good sign. And you've got the narrative going crazy. extreme greed and whatnot, probably a reasonable sign that it would be a good idea to start taking some profits, especially up around those levels. For now, ETH has pulled back. What we've been looking at around that 4,100 level. Ideally, we don't get any sort of weekly closes below the consolidation that's already occurred. And in terms of timeframes, we've seen 11 days down, we've seen 6 days down. We're currently in 5 days down so far. So still well and truly within range of any sort of consolidations and still above all of the previous resistance levels. So nothing to be too concerned about here. XRP pulling back here, lower highs at the moment, 260, still the level for support to come in. Breakdowns at that level, it's going to be a little bit weak and probably going to lead into those timeframes that we've been watching for XRP, whereby the end of the cycle, the peak could be in. I hate to say it, but it could be based on its entire history of only being able to do roughly 13 months to the upside. We're currently into that 13th month right now, so maybe we see a slightly higher high now or early September, but it's really got to get some strength above this top right here. You can see how much it has struggled to get above the previous old all-time highs from 2018. Tested it a few times this cycle, ideally holds up and then consolidates above 330, 340. Solana rejected again off 210 and again off 210 and again off 210, and March 2024 there's 210. So it's okay for now, still holding above 150, possibly consolidating, but it needs to get above that $210 level for this cycle before it's going to do anything significant. Otherwise, it's basically a weak altcoin which continues to remain below its major 50% level here. So this is the 50% of this bull market putting in lower highs, kind of like what ETH has done throughout this entire cycle. And to finish up with cycles, the dates that we'd looked at are October, and if we extend this out to the longest time frame that Bitcoin has done in these cycles, 163 weeks takes us roughly to around the first week of January. So you could argue maybe it goes into quarter one. Maybe we still take that as a win for quarter four because it's only a few days into that quarter one, spends the rest of the time going down. But they're the time frames that have lined up with previous cycles. 152 in the last two cycles, so cycle 2 and cycle 3 of Bitcoin. Maybe it gets a slightly extended move like the first cycle because we're into this significant correction and we get this boom into the end. And that cycle was around 163 weeks from the low. 163 weeks comes in that first week of January. Few interesting time targets to look at coming up, especially if, and I have to say if, because no one has the crystal ball, if we get through these quarter 3 periods of consolidation that we're seeing on the stock market, the S&P, on the NASDAQ, and if Bitcoin can get through it as well, according to its own cycle, here it is, and then we see that nice move into the end of the year. Stay tuned, like, subscribe, and drop us that little gold emoji if you made it this far in the video. I'll see you at the next one. Take care. Peace out.